reading today is, is Ruth, chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. Naomi loses her husband and sons. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, the wife's name was Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moab women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them. She and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take her back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons? Who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where should I go? Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her.
We're working through a series together. Hopefully there'll be some slides that will appear on the screen if they work, called Gospel Glimpses. And we're taking a book in the Old Testament of the Bible. Up until now we've kept in order, but I've skipped the book of Judges. I was kind of exercised about that earlier in the week. And looked at both of them, and I thought, no, I'm going to stick with the original plan, and we'll look first at the book of Ruth. I don't think it makes a great deal of difference. I promise you I will get round to the book of Judges, and many of the themes and contexts that are established in these books, particularly in this part of the Bible, Judges, the book of Ruth, the books of Samuel, the books of Kings, they have a recurring theme, and the recurring theme is this, and it's best to tell you now so that you realize there's no gain without some pain, that we struggle. We struggle as people. We always have. To reach the standard required by God. And that creates a tension that we all experience. We may pretend we don't. And other people may look at us and be absolutely convinced that not them, they're far too saintly. But we all struggle with these tensions in being what God wants us to be. So we need his help. And in this book of Ruth, which is a beautiful story, true story of a family. How are things with family? A story with trauma and tragedy and trouble. A story with difficult steps. And yet, a love story. It's always good, isn't it? I feel we ought to have some violin music in the background at this moment in time. And more than that, a love story that shows us that over everything and in control of everything, in spite of how we feel sometimes with our circumstances in life, is God. He doesn't blink, miss a step, make a mistake. He has a golden thread that runs through everything. The context of this book is redemption. Now, redemption is a good word, a good church word, isn't it? And the word redeemer, or variations of that word, Tim Keller tells us, is used 23 times in this book, which only contains 85 verses. I haven't counted them. I'm relying on Tim's word to be true in this. Okay? And it's very easy for us to read the narrative of what's happening in these days in history, in these lives of these people, and forget how it fits into the big storyline, the picture of God's unfolding plan in the Bible. Now, redemption. I'm going to go back to an old favorite story I can remember being told in my childhood about a little boy who made a model boat. And he took it to sail it in the river. And I don't know what went wrong, whether he was distracted for a moment, but the current took this boat and off it disappeared downstream. And it took it too quickly for him to be able to catch up with it. And he tried, but he could not rescue this boat. And it was gone. Until a few days later, when he was in his local town and his boat was in the shop window. I guess it was a charity shop. And he went in all excited and said to the shopkeeper, "That's my boat, can I take it?" And the shopkeeper said, "Well, hang on a minute, have you got proof?" And he didn't have any. He said, "Well, you're not the person who brought it in." "Well, no, because I lost it." So the little boy said, "Well, how much is it?" And you can tell how long ago this story was. It's £1. So he raced home. And he sorted through all that he could find in his little money box, and he found that he got exactly £1. And he went back and he bought his boat. And as he carried it out of the shop, he looked at this little boat and he said, "Now you are twice mine. I made you, and now I bought you back." And that is what redemption means. It means being bought back, brought back to God. This is a mother-in-law story. Please don't be too put off by the next slide that comes up. There was a certain era in British comedy, not one that I would condone, when poor mother-in-law stories were meat and drink to these guys. But not this story. This is a mother-in-law story that is difficult to read in parts. If we can move on to the following slide. But the reason why I want to share it with you, and I'm excited to share this with you, is because hope is found in a desperately difficult situation. All is not lost, even though it seems to be. And sometimes for us in life, we have our moments where that seems to be the case. How are we going to work through this? How do we cope with this? Where do we go with this? And in all of this mess, somehow Ruth the Moabite wife, daughter-in-law of Naomi, seems to grasp that true hope only comes in trusting God and being part of his plan. If you read what she said in chapter 1 again, she says in verse 16 to Naomi, when Naomi explains, and we'll go through the details in a little while, there's no point in you staying with me now. What's the point? Go back home. Go back where you came from. Where you go, I will go, she says, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Oh, the first thing I'd like to say to us there, wouldn't it be lovely if God made us so attractive as Christians that people were coming and saying that to us? Hey? I want to be where you are. I want to have some of what you've got. I want to know God like you do. May he in his goodness help us on that path to improve and to be faithful. But it goes on here. She says, where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And may the Lord deal with me be ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. So there's something that this Moabite lady has recognized, that even where, I want to just comfort you as a family, even death is only a temporary separation. And she knew that. And she said that. Okay? Now, I just want to remind you of the point of these studies. It is, first of all, to see what the book is all about. Then, how does it fit into the storyline of the Bible to move things along in God's great plan? And then finally, how does it point to the gospel of grace, the good news of what Jesus has done for each individual human being who will find their way to trust him? And how does it point to Jesus himself? So we're going to do a quick review of this story, and it will be bullet pointed on the screen there. This is at the time of the judges in Israel. So after they become established as a nation, and before they move into a time when they had a king, there was a sequence of judges. And some of them were okay, much like the kings who were to follow. Some of them were a poor show. Even Samson, who was one of the most famous. You've heard the story of Samson? His life was a mess, really, wasn't it? I mean, he wasn't a great example to follow. And, And the problem that God's people found was that they still had trouble. I mean, they thought they were in the promised land and everything was going to be fantastic. And yet they had trouble. And this is where the tension comes, and it's difficult. This is the difficult part. We live in a realm of trouble, not because of what God has created. He made everything good. We live in a realm of trouble because of what we have done to it as human beings in rejecting God. And so famines come. There was a famine in Israel. I don't know whether we've ever truly experienced famine, but some of you who can remember the war years will remember times of great deprivation where there was, well, goodness me, all I'll say is when we walk into Tesco's and hear the constant bleeps, we know how blessed we are today. But not so in their time. Our next point. Elimelech moves his family to Moab, which is enemy territory. I'm not going to go into all of the history of all of that, but when the land was settled, there were reasons why there were tensions. And he decides to move his family away from Bethlehem and out to Moab, which was the other side of the Dead Sea. Next point here. He has these sons, and their names are quite interesting. Names mean something, don't they? I don't know if you know the meaning of your name. I haven't looked up the meaning of mine, but I should know. It's a Bible name. But Marlon means sickly. It's not much of a name for a child, is it? Eh? And Kilion means wasting away. So they don't sound like they were a great prospect, these two sons. But maybe that had something to do with why Elimelech decided to move his sons away. They were obviously vulnerable, and it was a vulnerable time. It's not a bad thing, is it, for a father to make a decision for the good of his children? So, yeah, these are these two guys. Can you? Yeah. And then, sadly, while they're living in Moab, Elimelech himself dies. So Naomi becomes a widow. Then these boys marry Moabite girls. And then, they're their names, Orpah and Ruth. And then the boys both die. So just imagine how difficult this moment is for Naomi and for Orpah and for Ruth. And it has to be said that Naomi despairs. And in the words that John read to us there, the Lord's hand has turned against me. Now that's what she said. I'm just going to express an opinion for a moment. I don't believe that for a moment. I don't think that's what God does. But sometimes in life, that's how we feel God has acted towards us. And she expresses it. And there is an expression in there that's come about in recent years that it is okay sometimes to not be okay. I think sometimes it's absolutely fine for us to go to God and say, I don't understand what's going on. And I trust you to be in control. And I can't see how all that's working. And that's where she ends up. Just 4 things I want to pick up on here. Oh yes, Naomi despairs and she decides that she will go back to Bethlehem, but she is reluctant for these 2 girls to come with her for a number of reasons. But Ruth won't take no for an answer. I'm coming. I think this is for all that Naomi has been through and the rights and wrongs in the decision making of her husband, of the sons, of them as a family, there is something in Naomi that Ruth just wants to be around, isn't there? May God give us the ability to be people like that. I'm coming with you. It's going to be tough. I don't care. I'm going to come with you. Now, I want to remind you that the very first point there is the time of Judges, and we'll move on to our next slide. Because this time was very much like our time when it comes to God and people's response to God. In the very last verse of the preceding book of Judges, it said this: in those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. Does that sound like our society? And it's a time much like our own. Now, God has fulfilled his promise to Abraham of old. The family has grown into a nation. The nation has settled in the promised land. It should all be going well now, shouldn't it? But humanity doesn't have a great track record in being faithful to God. Because what we do in our fallen nature is we very quickly shove God off his rightful throne and we want to sit there. That's why it says here, everyone did as they saw fit. We've still not learned the lessons about how we should relate to each other with love and tenderness and grace and respect. As the dreadful situation that has happened in Northern Ireland over the last week has proved again. And what happens is that something that is already terrible and dreadful is suddenly picked up and spreads like a fire of hatred, doesn't it? Through like a tinderbox through society, so that there are politicians pleading for calm on our streets. Why do we do that? That's not how God intends us to be or to relate to each other. Quite the opposite. But when we develop a mentality that says, I'm right and you're wrong. Have you ever done that, by the way? It sounds a bit childish, doesn't it? When you don't want to hear something, you just put your fingers in your ear, la, 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 la. Okay? We as people generally do that to God. And it's a time just like that this story of Ruth occurs in. Why did Elimelech move his family out of the promised land? I can't answer that question. But he made that decision. And actually it was part of the plan when you consider it in retrospect, wasn't it? It was all part of what God planned. I'm sure there were church meetings and there were committee meetings and there were people who sat down, scratched their head, oh, what's he doing? Why? You know. But he went. God had provided a place for his people to be, a community of hope, a safe place. It had a welfare system. We learn that in the book of Ruth. It was a place of spiritual security. And God has provided one today. It's called his church. And that's what we should look like. And why is it so difficult for people to find their way to God and to trust him? And to follow his higher and better pattern for love and life? Because it was a time much like our own. The second point I'm going to make is this, that there is trouble and tragedy, and they strike. Elimelech, sorry, I gave you a whole load of names to read, didn't I? Elimelech dies, and his sons marry these ladies from Moab, and then they both die. Naomi is questioning what she should do next and seems to be devoid of any future hope. Trouble and tragedy. There's a verse there. There should be, if you can, yeah. This is what she says in Ruth chapter 1, verse 21. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty, when she returns to Bethlehem. The next slide here is a picture from the 1940s in Derbyshire. But where I've read this illustration, it wasn't taken from there. I think it was taken from a country in Europe where a decision had been made that a village where people were living would be dammed so that basically the valley could fill up with water and the village would be lost. This picture is the village, I think, of Derwent, and it was this Lady Bow Reservoir. Some of you may have been there. But as these people who were recording what it's like to get ready for a village like that, to have that fate, as they recorded what it felt like, they said this: what was the use of painting a house if it was going to be covered in water in 6 months? Why repair anything when the whole village was to be wiped out? So, week by week, the village became more and more bedraggled, more and more gone to seed, more woebegone. And then there's this quote: where there is no faith in the future, there is no power in the present. It's a sad state of affairs, isn't it? But that's what trouble can bring. It can convince us that there is nothing that we can have faith in for the future. And then we lose the power to function in the present. Trouble and tragedy strike. But in the middle of all of this, Naomi makes this critical decision. I'm going to go back to Bethlehem. And that is key in God's great plan. What about the daughter-in-laws? You stay. No, we're coming. No, you must stay. Okay, one of them says. The other one says, no, I'm going to stick with you and I'm going to trust God. Because the answer to despair is hope. Truth dawning with its hope. Ruth chapter 2 and verse 3. What they've done now, Ruth and Naomi have arrived back in Bethlehem. They're destitute. They don't have anything. They're going to have to fall on the generosity of farmers who will allow them to pick up some grain in the fields. And Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, "Let me go into the fields and pick up some leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went and entered the field and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz. I love that. Makes it sound like a throwaway casual incident, doesn't it? As it turned out. There's no as it turned out. Who was guiding her steps, her decision making, the direction she walked that day? She might not have been able to see all of this, but God can. And he directs her steps. Truth is dawning, and with it comes hope. God is in control. Our faults and failings don't change that. It's easy to see the problems, and Naomi actually says, "Don't call me by my name, call me Mara." Because bitterness has come into my life. It's good for us to stop and acknowledge the damage we personally can potentially do, and the fact that only through God can we find forgiveness and true hope. I read yesterday of a minister who was about to celebrate his 5th anniversary in a church, and he thought, how can I get some bottoms on seats? So he decided he would advertise that on the day of the 5th anniversary celebrations, he would name the person in the church who'd given him the most grief in his 5-year ministry. That worked. No one missed that day. And they all sat there waiting. Who is it? I bet it's them over there, or this one or that one. Our human nature probably means that we sit there and think, it couldn't possibly be me. And so he stood up and he said, well, I promised you I would reveal the person in this church who's given me the most grief since I came here, and I'm going to do it now. The person is me. And he quoted the verse from the Bible, "Oh, wretched man that I am." It's best to be realistic. I can mess things up here with none of you in attendance, okay? But it's not about me. It's about God. Ruth is a poor widow. She's now, if you like, a refugee in a foreign land. She's vulnerable because of this. But there is a food bank, and there is a kinsman-redeemer, and there is a plan. All is not lost. It's never lost with God. And the best is always yet to come. The best for us in trusting God is ahead. Do I hear a hallelujah? We should never lose sight of that. In the moments where sometimes understandably despair may seem to win out, hope is never lost with God. Because there is a timeline of his great plan. And all I want to say in finishing is this. As you look at all of that part, the Old Testament, which we're working through, Jesus is there. He's in this book. This man Boaz that we haven't had a lot of time to talk about, but Boaz is connected to Naomi's family, Elimelech's family. There's a system that God had in place through his law where if people ended up in a situation that Naomi did, and therefore Ruth, who was with her, that they would be able to obtain food. But also that there was a responsibility on any family member so qualified to do it, to take over and to look after. In fact, more than that, to buy back this relative who'd fallen on hard times. Boaz moves everything, heaven and earth, if you like, to enable that to happen. And Ruth falls in love with and marries Boaz. Isn't that lovely? And the two of them have a child. And that child has a child. I'm going to get muddled up in how many now. And then that child has a child, and that child's name is David, the great-grandchild of Ruth and Boaz, the first king, who was really worth his weight in gold in Israel. And an ancestor of Jesus. So Ruth ends up in the ancestral line of Jesus himself. So all of this difficulty, tragedy, trouble, is actually part of the line of Jesus coming. What did Jesus come to do? Well, because all of that first part of the Bible had this constant tension in place, and we still feel it sometimes now. Do you know when all of this was going to be solved and dealt with? When somebody was going to turn up who could live a life that pleased God and fulfilled his law to the letter, and then was going to go to the cross to offer his perfect sacrifice in the place of us who are not perfect. Do you know when that was going to happen? Right there. All of the tension there. Actually, some of the tension here was going to be dealt with by him. That's why we're here. That's why we love him. That's why I urge you today, if you've never done it before, trust him. And then you will find a hope that will last not just through the changing scenes of life, but forever.